Hello and welcome to Serious Coin. I'm Kelly Willis Green, and this is the podcast where we have rich conversations about wealth. And today I'm talking to a very successful entrepreneur who's done a lot of thinking on the subject of wealth. He's even written a book on it. He is Derek Bullen, founder and CEO of S.i Systems, which is one of the largest IT staffing providers in North America. And his book is In Defense of Wealth, a modest rebuttal to the charge that the rich are bad for society. How's that for a title? In it, he says that wealth is not the enemy and societies should strive to have more wealth creators, not fewer. Well, whether you agree with his premise or not, and you should probably read his book to decide, what's really interesting about Derek is that he has one of the most thoughtful and methodical approaches to managing family wealth that I've ever come across. And he's willing to talk about it. And I know a lot of people wrestle with these issues of when and how much to involve their kids in family finances. So you'll be very interested in hearing what Derek has to say about what he and his wife Susan did to prepare their kids to steward wealth long before they even had money. Derek is also candid about the struggles he faced in building his business, the lean times, when they moved so often that his young daughter would pack her clothes each night before going to bed in case they moved in the morning. He also told me about the epiphany that came to him during a family member's treatment at the Betty Ford Center that caused him to do a cold restart on his entire business. Derek is definitely a deep thinker. He's opinionated, and I think you'll find him fascinating. I started by asking him to tell me about his journey as an entrepreneur, and it's epic. Have a listen.
I think for any entrepreneur, the first thing is to survive. And then the second thing is to find and navigate your river of cash. So when I graduated from university, I was actually playing in a band, and that was my first business. And it was good money. It was great money for a young kid. We had songs on the radio and,
What were they? What were some of the songs? Do I know them?
oh, Too Many Days, He's Number One. It was big in Canada and big in Japan. And we did not get signed to a major label. And we came close with A&M, and then I was like, what am I gonna do? And then that's when you hit the survival button,
Right.
because and I'm like, oh, I forgot. I actually totally had forgotten that I had this engineering degree. So I said, great, I'll use it. And so I applied for some programming jobs. It was the national energy policy. It was a terrible time for jobs, but programming was brand new, and we had done a lot of programming and electrical engineering in school. So got a job doing that. And in that job, I found that I could program after hours at night and on the weekends. I could do freelance programming. And then pretty soon the freelance programming just absorbed, all of my time. So that was my next river of cash after the band was programming. And I really, really liked it. And it kind of led me to do this project that ended up, the person hired me to be the vice president of R&D for this company, and I moved to Ireland with my family, and it was great. And I moved the company off of this VAX mainframe to client server computers, and it was apparently not the thing to do, and I was fired, so I had to survive again.
What was it like being fired? You're over there,
Oh,
you've moved everybody over like,
it was so sad. I was so sad because it was a wonderful lifestyle. I was paid well. I was an expat. Taxes were low, and we were just spending every dime I made traveling around Ireland. We saw more of Ireland than our neighbors who lived in Cork had ever seen. And my oldest daughter was in Montessori, and it was great. And then one day it was just over, and it was terrifying because somebody else had full control. And not only was I fired, but I owned 15% of the company, and I was summarily diluted. And that's when I learned you never have the lawyer of the majority partner also work for you and write up your shareholder agreement, right? You need your own lawyer.
for sure.
Yeah, so I had to come back, and I was back at square one hitting the survival button, another time. And I just told my wife Susan, I said, if I work for somebody else, I'll just get fired again because I'm right, but they won't know I'm right for probably 2 years, and that'll just happen again. And so I started my own company, and I went back to what I know was programming, and then I started getting friends that I knew programming, and I made a little spreadsheet that said if I could get 10 friends working for me, I'd make as much money as me programming 8 hours a day. And first of all, it was a very terrible financial model, and I needed to get a lot better at spreadsheets. I needed a lot more than 10 people working for me to make the same amount of money. But it got me started down that path. And today, SI Systems is the largest IT consulting company in Canada. We have 6,500 professionals doing projects everywhere for the oil and gas industry, for the banks, for the government, um, for the tech sector, for the telcos. It's wonderful. There's a lot of things that we touch every day that our people brought into existence.
You have made the point in your book that generally, of course, entrepreneurs do not have a straight path to success, right? You're grinding it out. It
Hmm.
takes a lot of grit. There's ups and downs, speed bumps. And you were very candid in saying that you didn't have, as you put it, the normal, mostly annoying setbacks that we all confront, but you had some nuclear magnitude disasters, I think you said, in the business, and
Yeah.
more than one. So, thinking back, what was the most challenging one that you remember?
Early on, the most challenging one that I remember is, my mom had a terrible time with prescription drugs, and we sent her to Betty Ford. And my company was new and it was barely making money. I could pay my wife, but I couldn't pay myself. And my mom went to Betty Ford, and we thought that's great. She's going there, she'll get all fixed up. And it's not like that. Then the family has to come, and the family has to learn how you work with an addict. And
Mm.
so we went down there for family week. And all of a sudden, I realized, Kelly, I was a codependent to all of my employees. I would give them work, assignments, things to do that we build the clients for, and they would immediately turn around and line up at my office and be like, "Oh, Derek, I don't know how to do. Could you do this for me?" And I realized we were a very small company at the time. I've got 25 people, and I'm doing all their work, and and I fired them all. Yeah, I brought them all into the boardroom and I said, "Look, guys," because I realized from Betty Ford that I was a codependent to all of my employees. And I just said, "Look, guys, we got two choices. I'm going to go to a pure consulting model. I'm going to pay you for every hour that you work, right? Rather than you're an employee and you get paid for all the hours I work. So I'm going to pay you for every hour you work as a consultant on an hourly basis, and you can decide to become a contractor and do it that way, or I can pay you everything I owe you, your vacation, your severance, everything, and you can get a package." And so of the 25, 22 quit. And the three that were left over were the three that I didn't want. And it was a cold restart in the middle of the year, but that was the start of our revenue growing because I replaced them with people that were accountable, could do their own work. And now, from what I learned at Betty Ford, I was a much more of an accountable adult, having accountable adults work for me. And their day job was to produce things. And I no longer felt guilty as the entrepreneur, having them do the work and having me, collect the money. And if I did a good job, there was a little bit left over for the shareholders at the end of the year. And I no longer had any guilt about that.
Isn't it interesting how something, I don't want to say is obscure, but something from your personal life, a mental health challenge, ends up being the biggest business lesson and setting up your business model?
Always. And I tell my employees this too. I sometimes say it in a town hall, but I tell them most of the valuable things I learned in life, I learned when times were shitty. That's when you really have to dig into the vault and find something about you that you can move forward with. And that something uh, grows into something wonderful over time, but only that squeeze in the moment makes you dig that deep.
Personally and professionally, I would say.
Hmm. True.
You mentioned your wife, Susan. I just wanted to make a comment about her because in reading your book, I thought, well, there's that old line about behind every successful man is a surprised woman. That was not the case with Susan. She always had such tremendous belief in your potential for success and confidence in the darkest moments when
Yeah.
you were forced to make a decision about, do we throw in the towel or go do something else, or do we go for it? And it struck me,
Yeah.
she numerous times you mentioned in the book, she always said, let's go for it.
Yeah, she always was there. She was a great partner. She is a great partner, and we decided always to keep moving forward. And how could we keep moving forward? When we left for Ireland, we had a nice big house in Calgary, and we leased it out. And when we came back, that was one of our toughest decisions. Is, hey, as soon as that lease is over, we got to sell that house. We can't afford it, and we need the money to start the business. And that's interesting. Now people are like, "Oh, it must be nice," and I'm like, "You wouldn't have the stomach for this kind of stuff." And plus, every dollar that I have now, I must have made or given away at least $100,000 to everybody else in payroll, taxes, leases, rents. Like, I'm at the end of the food line. Only if I do it, and you can't make money in a vacuum. You can't just go and say, "Oh, I'm going to make $1 million." If you want to make $1 million, you better figure out what your business model is and how much money you're going to give everybody else who works for you and helps you get there. And it'd probably be like, you're going to have to make 99 million for everybody else, and you'll get to keep $1 million at the end. That's kind of how it goes. And Susan has just followed me through that whole process, and a lot of sacrifice, because there was a lot of times when we didn't have money, and there's no immediate payback and there's no shortcut. There's just the next step in front of you. And if you are lucky enough to find yourself doing something of value, more and more people will start to vote for it with their wallets. And then you have to be smart enough. A lot of entrepreneurs get a lot of revenue, but they don't make a lot of money. And then you got to be smart enough to actually charge what your service is worth, and hire quality talent to execute it, and pay that talent what they're worth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long road.
You mentioned the lean times. I thought it was interesting that you said at one point,
Mhm.
you moved many times. You were living with your parents for a while, your parents-in-law for a while. You moved so often that your young daughter started to pack her clothes at night in little brown bags
Mhm.
so that when she woke up in the morning, she'd be ready to go if you moved again.
Yeah. Yeah, she was so yeah, she didn't have I didn't realize as a parent what how much kids need a sense of permanence, especially when they're very young and they have just a black and white mentality. I also think she could sense the anxiety in Susan and I, because we kept moving to smaller and
Mm.
cheaper places to live, you know. And then finally the lease was up on our house and we could sell that house, and then we had enough money to buy our own little house and restart there. But that sense of permanence was loss of permanence for her was, I think it's still tough on her. I think it still has a scar.
You mentioned the stomach for risk. Um, so you have that not only as an entrepreneur, but I would say some might say writing a book defending multimillionaires and billionaires are 1% in society is a moderately risky endeavor. Why did you decide to write this book?
Oh, Kelly. Well, three things. So one of my daughters had Lyme disease, and very, very bad. And so we took her to a clinic in Utah that specialized in treating it. And it was expensive. It's like 27 grand a month.
Mhm.
And there's a young uh, kid there who's also getting the same treatment and is getting 11 months worth of this treatment. And he was an Amazon employee, and the Amazon healthcare plan was paying this for him. And you could tell he was a minimum wage guy, and he couldn't say enough bad things about Amazon. They don't pay tax. Jeff Bezos does this. And so I came back the next day and I was just like, Amazon doesn't pay tax because they've got 40 billion in profits, and they spend 42 million on R&D. And the government is incenting companies to spend money on R&D to make the country more competitive. It's fair, like it's fair game. And Bezos doesn't pay tax some years because he doesn't pay himself some years. And he has to make most of his money for everybody else because he only owns 10% of Amazon. And I said, it's such a good deal for society. And I said, and look, it's paying for you being here for almost a year. This is, a first class clinic. Anyways, the kid took his IVs outside on the curb for the rest of the day and smoked. But I was like, this pay your fair share is just wrong. And then when I came back to Canada, there was this It was another thing like the Panama Papers, where some uproar about people having money offshore. And someone on Facebook that I went to elementary school just texted me out of the blue, "You better get all your money back on shore and pay your fair share." And I just told him, I said, "Hey, if you I am paying my fair share." I said, "Look, I work for everybody else for more than half of the year,
Hmm.
and me and anybody in Canada making more than 90 grand a year, we're paying for half the roads, half the schools, half the hospitals, half of every social benefit you enjoy, your parents enjoy." And I'm like, "If you don't like having rich people in Canada, that's fine. But if we leave, you're just going to be left with half of everything, and you will have to pay for it." And he was like, "Oh my God, I had no idea." And then the final straw that launched me into the book is I moved out to the West Coast, and some people here are very left of center. And I was having dinner at the neighbors, and it was a dinner party. So there were other people from the community, and they thought I was from Toronto, and just a hilarious, interesting guy. And then somewhere towards the end of dinner, I said, "Oh, no, I'm actually from Calgary." And it just was acerbic. And they're like, "Oh, you guys are so stupid. I'm glad you're in recession. You deserve everything and that you get." And they're like, "You guys create all the carbon gas." And I'm like, "Did you know that the people on Bowen Island, where the Green Party came, that's the highest carbon footprint per capita in Canada? Like, the ferries don't run on pixie dust, and they take a ferry for groceries, music lessons, hockey tournaments, work, everything." And that just inflamed it even more. And I was like, people just don't have the facts on what a benefit to society it is to have wealth creators, which are companies that make a lot of money, people that make a lot of money, entrepreneurs that are very, very rich, people that are very, very rich. I mean, they society has demonized it for so long that they've lost all track of the facts. So I wrote the book to put out the facts, and then I did a series of articles which were well read and well picked up afterwards, and I promoted it on my LinkedIn and on my Facebook. I promptly lost half of my social connections on Facebook.
I asked Derek if he thought his book had changed the minds of that Amazon worker and his dinner party guests on the West Coast, and he said he thinks he mostly upset them. But Derek is passionate when he talks about the odyssey of an entrepreneur as a wealth creator and the multiplier effect that has on the economy. In his book and in our conversation, we talked more about the path that led to his own liquidity event and how he feels about the life-changing wealth he now has to manage. He told me about the rules they have in their family charter around the use of wealth and the first thing he did with his kids when he cashed out.
I joined a coaching group, and then a fellow, Larry Fichtner, I mentioned him in my book. He had a mentor in his life, and so Larry said, "I'd like to pay it forward and be your mentor, and I'll purchase 15% of your company. You'll own less, but we'll make it worth much more than 100% of what you've got now." And he got on board. We raised some money. We raised $2 million from family and friends, which I thought was impossible. Fortunately, he had more friends and more family than I did. And then we went and we built technology to run our business, and then we started doing acquisitions. And the first acquisitions, I was just like, I was bolt upright at 3 in the morning, just ready to vomit. I'm just like, "Oh my God." And he calmed me down the next day. And he said, "Derek, don't worry. You're not betting the farm. This is a good scenario. We'll make it through this." And so I kind of faked it. And then, yeah, I grew into it, and it was a great run. Larry's older than me. He's in his late 70s. And, he just told me coming into 2018, he said, "Look, Derek, I'm older than you. I do not want to leave my kids shares in a private company and have them work with it. You need to figure out a way for me to exit." So I brought in new investors, and Larry exited the company very well, in very good form for the time and value he contributed. And Larry and I paid out billions to software workers and knowledge workers all across Canada over our time. And we got to keep a couple million for ourselves at the end.
So I always love asking entrepreneurs this question, that when you had that liquidity event and you spent, better part of 3 decades building that company up, all your hard work,
Hmm.
you were already at that time wealthy, but now there's a liquidity event and the deal closes, the money's in your account, you look at it. What is that like?
It's another set of responsibility. It's great though. It's great because, all of most of my wealth was on paper.
Hmm.
And when Larry and I would talk about it, and I also had this business coach, Doug Bowie, and he would say, Derek, what what's your legacy for you and your family if tomorrow somebody Uberizes your business, or tomorrow your business is the next blockbuster, and some new company called Netflix takes you out? Like, what's your legacy? He said you really do need to de-risk, not only to help Larry finish his storyline arc with your company, but also for yourself and for your legacy with the family. So when you do get a lot of money, it's overwhelming. And then you have to think in this order: do I have enough for my wife and I to live our life the way that we want to? And so I just assumed that what if I live to 95? What if she lives to 100? We need to take whatever money we need, because when you're an entrepreneur, there's no pension.
Right.
you know Everybody's like that. Oh, it must be nice. Well, hey, I don't have a pension, so if I'm not successful, I'm screwed, right? So do you have enough for yourself? So my wife and I planned that out. And then the next was, do you have enough for your family? So then you have to figure out, what is your legacy to your family? Like, if I will have excess money, I don't want to give it to my kids when my kids are 60 years old. I want to give it to them when they're young. In our case, we figured out that we want to give some to our kids right now to amplify the work that they're doing in the world. And it has to be a meaningful exchange of energy. You're doing this work, so we're going to contribute this to help you go farther. And then a portion of it is going to be for grandkids and legacy endowment. And it's not free money. It's money to help you go farther in the world. Like, it's money that my grandkids will have their university paid for, and things like that. And then once you've got that taken care of, then you say, what now? We can take care of the world. And so what do we want to do? And like the number some of the biggest charity that happened recently was Bezos setting up a $10 billion charity to fight climate change, or to aid organizations who are doing something constructive about climate change. And his ex-wife, Mackenzie, is was 50 billion.
Yeah. She's pledged to give it all away, basically.
Yeah, and so is Warren Buffett, so is Bill
Yep.
Gates, and I think there's a time when people say, okay, I've got enough for me, I've got enough for my family, now I'm going to take care of the world.
Well, let's go back to your kids and how you've involved your kids, because I think people could really learn from what you've done in terms of the system, the way you set up your wealth. You've been very, very intentional about things. When did you first start talking to your kids about your wealth? And as you mentioned, you're creating this legacy and endowment. A lot of people worry about the fact that they might rob the next generation of initiative.
You can,
And
you can.
you, I think, have been really thoughtful around that. And how are you not doing that?
You really can rob the next generation of initiative if it's just a handout. It has to be some kind of meaningful exchange. And if you look at it, like, even if you looked at today's list of the top 50 wealthiest people in Canada, or top 100 in the United States, whichever one you look at, over 70% of those people made their money in their lifetime. Bill Gates made his money in his lifetime. Elon Musk made his money in his lifetime, right? And so wealth is really an equal opportunity game. In 20 years, the top wealthy people in each nation will be a different list. And people think, oh, you just inherit it forever and ever. You don't. Making money is very, very hard. Keeping money is even harder.
Hmm.
So the first thing we talked to the kids about was that. And we said, this was in 2009. I said, my plan is, and I've been working at this for 20 years, is that it's the company, as it makes money, it's going to have value, and somebody will invest in it sometime, and we'll have money. And we have to talk about what that means to us as a family. And the first thing was getting a family charter, and the family charter had nothing to do with money. It was like, this is how we're going to communicate to each other, not only about money, but about important things. And this is how we're going to have family meetings, and this will be the cadence of family meetings. And the kids were like, yeah, I don't know, I'll do it, but we don't really have money right now. And I'm like, it's more than that, guys. Like, in the family charter, you have to decide and identify what's your passion in life. and what do you want to do? And when we have money, how can that money help you in a meaningful exchange of energy? Like it's something you're doing, something you're putting your time and effort in. How can it work for you? And when would money not work? And very easily we said, yeah, if anybody had an addiction, regardless of what the addiction was, they can't have family money. If anybody just wants to sit on the couch and eat Doritos, they cannot have family money. But if somebody wants to do a career, a business, and something that they're expert in, and the money can be used to accelerate the energy that they're putting into it, that is what we'll do, as a family. And then we started to say, how do we start setting you up to be stewards of the wealth? Because some of the money will be for your advantage in your lifetime, but we want the majority of it to travel through time, through successive generations. And it's going to be very, very tough because the majority of families lose all their money by the time the grandkids are adults.
Right.
And we said, how can we be more like the Richardson family in Canada and just keep it going and keep it alive? What are the rules? And you get these great rules like, as you start to accumulate wealth, like we have a real estate company. Well, if you're a family member and you want to work in the real estate company, first of all, you have to be good at it in the outside world. You have to go work for someone else and prove that you're good at real estate and that's your thing. And then you can come and work in the real estate company, and get paid a salary there. And these were the rules we kind of set up in the family charter before there was any money.
And when you set up that charter, roughly how old were your kids then?
You can't set it up too early. So we set up that charter in 2009. So my oldest would have been 19 and my youngest would have been 16. And you could just see them, rolling their eyes.
Right.
But we went and had our meetings with a facilitator. Dennis Jaffe came up from San Francisco and he started talking about the issues and, what are people's passions. And then after a while, we moved from Dennis Jaffe to Chris Clark, and she runs a multifamily office, and she helped us craft, the Constitution and our values, as a family. Because while I'm alive and while Susan's alive, the family meeting, the agenda, the values, the stewardship will pass to our kids. Um, while we're still alive, when they have kids, and they'll run the whole process again. And it's not a static thing, and I don't want to rule it from the grave with trust accounts and lawyers and everything.
Right.
It's really treating your kids as adults and moving them forward. First thing I did when I cashed out is I sent my kids to Rotman for the 4-day family office course, and the only other person their age was someone from the McCain family. Everybody else was in their mid 50s, and their parents had, or their last parent had just passed. And all of a sudden, they were given all of this money in the will, and they had no idea what to do with it. And so, anyways, after we did the family charter, then we started talking about money. And we started talking about what happens when you have money. When you have money, everybody comes to you and says, I have this great idea. Yeah, I have this sure thing. Oh, it's only this much money.
Yes.
And what we also have helped out our greater family, our broader family, nieces, nephews, cousins, uncles, aunts. And we talked about our experiences because you help somebody with one thing. They say, oh, I've got this health problem and I can't get to the right doctor. And you're like, you know what, your family will get you to the right doctor. That doctor's in New York. And you'd think that would be it, and all of a sudden they're cancer free and it's fantastic. And then they're like, oh, I've got this dental problem and I could pay for it. And I'm like, so guys, we got to have some boundaries because everyone's going to line up at the door, and even my kids, as after we sold the company, their friends called them and said, hey, I don't know if you remember me from university, but I'm a stockbroker now. And I have a relationship with all my clients, and I would, I think I could do a really good job managing your money. And I was just telling the kids, like, the more money you get, the more you're going to get solicited. And we got to have values. We got to have a long-term plan, um, rules of the road. And one of the rules of the road was if you're a beneficiary of the family office, you have to have a life insurance policy when you're 25. so that in the far, far future, you put back into the family office the money that you take out, but you put it in through a life insurance policy. And some families are like, "Oh, it's really macabre," but it's just a thing that we decided as a group, and everybody has to have a prenup, um, before they cohabitate or before they married. And it's important to talk about those things when your kids are young. It's hard to talk about them after they're married, right?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that because I think that's huge and helps people who are maybe at a much earlier stage and just wrestling with those questions now. I'm curious when you talk about these values and rules. I interviewed Carolyn Cole, who's one of the leading experts in family offices in North America, and she talks about family first families and wealth first families.
Family first families are the ones that make it. Wealth first families, hard road, hard, unfun road.
But the example you might give is so somebody comes and says, "Yeah, I do want to pursue this business. This is what I'm doing in the world, and I'd like some support from the family." But you may look at that business and think that's a dumb idea. That's never going to succeed. Do you back it? Or do you say, we're only going to commit resources of the family to things that we think that are going to build more wealth, as opposed to, I don't want to say indulge, but support the interests of family members. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so our family charter, Kelly, says that it has to be a unanimous decision. So first of all, you have to attend all the family meetings. There's one every month, and if you miss more than two, you don't get a vote that year in Family Matters, right? And so you want to do something. You want to open up a bar because it would be really, really cool, right?
Right.
So you bring it forward to the family, and it has to be a unanimous decision. And one person in the family or two says, this is actually a real thing that happened. Do you have a business plan? Nope. But I'll go get a business plan. And then the business plan comes up, and it's like, we're going to get the best architect, we're going to get the best lease, we're going to get the best
Right.
manager, blah, blah, blah. And then, it comes for a unanimous vote, and someone else in the family says, well, you don't have any experience in this. Before you do it, I think you should work in the hospitality industry and become a manager of a place that's like this, right? And that'll be the next step. But I can't, it was not it never became a unanimous vote. But then on the other hand, we were voting on real estate plays, and came up, and someone said, I've got this building. It's in Toronto. It's a brownstone. It's a bar and pub on the bottom, but it's a rooming house on the top two floors. And these are men that are just above being homeless. And our family charter says that we believe in enriching the community, and mixed use communities are very healthy. And even though it's in a gentrifying area, we think that that rooming house helps with the strengthen the fabric of that community. And it was a unanimous vote to purchase the property and to optimize the commercial level down below, and to segregate the entrance to the rooming house so that we could continue with the rooming house but not interfere with the businesses, but continue providing that service to the community. Because these are, for the most part, very hard-working, honest guys who are responsible enough to share bathrooms, share showers, and all they need is just a place to sleep and be. And that was unanimous. So our family charter says for this generation and at this time, it's unanimous. As the family grows, so now it's the parents, the founders, and then it's a partnership of three siblings. But as the family grows, there's going to be this cooperative of cousins, and how they vote on who gets money or what, is different. I don't know the Richardson's family personally, but they do come and speak on intergenerational wealth. Their take on that bar issue would be, we want to help create entrepreneurs inside the family. Their thing would be, well, we're not going to spend whatever it is, $2 million launching a bar. But if you want to try it on a small scale, the family's willing to give you 250,000, and, prove out the concept, learn from it, see what you can do. That's a way that a larger family office might take that. We take it to unanimous vote, and everybody gets a vote.
Family, I know, is very important to you. And one of the things I think you mentioned in your book is you take 60 days off a year to recharge with family and share new experiences.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing that? How have you managed to do that and run a business? What's that all about?
I love that question. So my business coach, Doug Bowie, and by the way, we spent all August in Africa with the family. It was so
Right.
great, you know. And again, lots of things I'm bringing back to the business that I learned, especially seeing the hospitality industry in Africa. But my business coach, this is post firing the 25 people, and we kind of rebirth. But we were profitable, or revenue was growing, but we weren't staggeringly profitable. We were just above break even, you know, and it was a lot of work and brain damage just for a break even company every year. And I said, you know, I really got to figure this out. And he said, if you really want to figure it out, come and do a vision quest with me with the Blood Indians. And so he had been a lawyer for the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta, which spans most of southern Alberta. It's a massive First Nations. And they were very hospitable. They hosted him and his guests, which I was one of them, for several years to come and do vision quests. And so my vision quest was I went down there with the intention, what do I need to do to make my business profitable? And you go to the sweat lodge and you do 4 rounds of the sweat lodge, and then the community comes out and there's just food everywhere and it's a feast. And that's the last you're going to eat for 3 or 4 days. And then you go out and traditionally they would do it with just a blanket and a pipe, but we go out with our tents and everything, but there's no food or water for at least 3 days. Yeah. And during that time, you're just waiting to get a vision. A vision will come
Mm.
to you in your dreams or in nature or whatever. And the vision that came to me is, if you want to be profitable, you got to start taking 60 days off a year. So I did. I bought a little Marilyn Monroe calendar, and I started. It was tough taking time off and taking time away from my business because I thought it would fail if I wasn't there, you know, thinking about it and worrying about it obsessively. And what I learned in that year was, if I vacate for like a week or 2 weeks or even a month at a time, other people will work so hard to make it go. And when you come back, you find out that some people have excelled and exceeded your best expectations of them, and once in a while someone doesn't show up, and you're able to say for the person who didn't show up, you know, this isn't really the right place for you, and you're not really the right person to help me on my mission and my vision. And the person who really showed up for you while you were absent, you're like, you are my leadership pipeline. Like, you obviously have enough talent to do your day job and to do parts of my job when I'm not here. You're my leadership pipeline. Like, you are promotable. And it really helped me see who could come up with me in the company as the company grew, and who, you know, was in the wrong company, and I could help them, you know, find it compassionately, find something that was better for them. That's how it worked, and I've done it since that day, and it's still phenomenal.
I would think too, that's on the company side and the professional benefits, but it must also renew you as a leader. I find when I'm away, I get inspired by things that I see. I'm out of my, regular environment, and just the brain operates differently.
You believe more things are possible, and not thinking about your business allows you space for the big ideas to come in. And I also find that when I leave work, it takes me about a week to stop pining to go to work every day and stop wanting to be at work. And then I have a space, you know, for the big ideas to come in. And when I leave work, I've got a list that's multiple pages long of all the things I must attend to. And after, you know, 2 weeks away, that list is very short. And if I stay away for 3 weeks or a month, the list is very short. It's just the essentials. And I get to come back with clarity. We just have to really do well on these essentials. Everything will work out.
Last question, and then I want to switch gears to ask you your views of wealth. Um, what would be your best piece of advice to someone who has just come into wealth through a liquidity event and they want to be smart about how to handle it, how to manage it? And that could be financially, emotionally, personally. What one piece of advice would you have?
Well, they're going to have to do the work, because it's much harder to keep your money than it is to make it.
Do you really believe that?
And
28 years, you slugged it out. You took risks,
oh yeah,
and this is
it's
harder?
way harder. It's way harder. I mean, the government wants to tax you at every turn. If you're slugging it out and running a company for 28 years and you lose $1 million, no problem, because my company's going to make $1 million this year, and I'm back in the play, and I can be the happy-go-lucky entrepreneur, like, oh, I tried this, it didn't work out. I tried that, it didn't work out, but my company made the money, and then when you cash out, your company's not there making the money. And when you lose $1 million, it's gone,
Yeah.
you know? And that's why if you look at like lottery winners, lotteries now don't give you a lump sum. They say, we'll give you that money every year for the rest of your life, because lotteries that gave people a lump sum, 70% of lottery winners were broke and in debt 2 years after winning 25 million, 30 million. And money is devilishly hard to keep. That's my number one thing. You've got to take it seriously because it's devilishly hard to keep.
That's great. And it leads well into the money questions I have for you. And I ask these of all my guests, but I'm really interested in your answers because you are so thoughtful about these things. How do you define wealth?
True wealth
Hmm.
is the sum of your financial and non financial assets. Financial assets and money is really distilled creativity, it brings optionality. Like money can't buy you happiness, but money can buy you comfort. But your non-financial assets are actually the drivers of true wealth. Your non-financial assets is the quality of your relationship, the quality of your engagement with your community, um, your health. How good is your health? How's your vitality? What's your fandom? What do you spend time at freely, where time just flows and
Mm,
you get to be in pure joy, those non-financial assets. What's your education? What education do you want to get that you don't have? It's You have to have both. Money just gives you optionality, creativity, and freedom, but your non-financial assets are what makes you truly wealthy.
I love that answer. That's inspiring. Um, okay, speaking of the financial assets, what was the first time? Do you remember a moment where you thought, wow, I, I've really made it. I'm wealthy now.
Kelly, honestly, I don't think of a time. I think I've been on a giant continuum. I always believed that if I did my best efforts and surrendered the outcome, to the divine, that things would work out well. And but I never had a problem putting in my best efforts well before there was any reward. And I think mostly my focus is on what's my next best effort. So for instance, like I cashed out in 2018 and I was like, so I need to put my best efforts into writing a book. And it became a number one bestseller on the Wall Street Journal, and but I didn't have that expectation either. It was just like, I'm just going to put my best efforts into that.
What What's the biggest luxury line item on your expense statement?
Luxury for me,
Mm,
family expeditions where we all travel and travel well are luxurious. And I loved climbing Kilimanjaro. I loved seeing my wife and my kids and my friends climb it more than I liked being on the top myself. That was my joy. And so the luxury item is that you can, from time to time, take your family out for a magnificent experience. And when they were little, you know, out for a magnificent experience was going to a park in Calgary with public barbecues and cooking wieners. And that was our best family time at that time. And now I've just got means that we could go do something like we just go to Africa and climb the mountain, see the gorillas, and share that experience together with family and friends. That's my number one luxury item. And Kelly, it's an extension of how we raised our kids. Even when we started to become affluent, our kids didn't get a new snowboard every year, a new ski jacket every year, although all their friends did, and many of their friends did in school. we always spent our money on experiences instead of possessions. And I think we're still bent that way.
Well, the research shows spending money on experiences is more linked to happiness than spending money on material goods. Um, this might seem like an odd question given the book you've published, but is there any aspect to your wealth that makes you feel uncomfortable?
No, not at all. I work so hard for it, and I'm a good steward of it, and I've enriched my community tenfold by becoming wealthy. Everywhere that I've ever lived became better because I was in that community making money. And I can tell you, to the person making a job, to the services, to the landlord, yeah, and there's a couple things that my wife and I do, like as I told you, if you give people money, you can never give people enough money.
Mm-hmm.
But what we found is that if you pay for education, it's a meaningful exchange of energy. The recipient has to go to school and has to pass. So my wife and I have put a lot of kids through university. And then the other thing where people will finally hit a point where they'll say, "Yep, that's good, that's enough," is feeding people. And we've done a lot of good work in that respect too. And so I think wherever we are in whatever community, and now we're more of a national family than a local family in Canada, we've always made the community better by making money.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I want to thank my guest, Derek Bullen, for sharing so much of his experience around creating and managing wealth. You can buy his book, In Defense of Wealth, on Amazon or at bullenbooks.com. BULLEN books.com. Thank you for listening to Serious Coin. If you enjoyed the content and you want to hear more, please do subscribe or follow us so you don't miss an episode. Serious Coin podcast is provided for your general interest only, and nothing we discuss should be taken as investment, tax, legal, or other professional advice. Always talk to a licensed professional before you take any financial decisions.